You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 9th of August 2013. Tribunal told surgeon lied about removing brain tumour. Court, paedophile who groomed 14-year-old Peterborough girl is jailed. Appeal after Middle Eastern man rapes woman in Blackpool. Norwegian pagan set to sue France. Sweden, Sapo targets leftist militants. Gorbachev denies false reports of his death after hacker attack. Israel gives preliminary approval for 800 settler homes in West Bank. Thought for the day, British propaganda. And finally, no screams, I'm having a baby. UK news. Tribunal told surgeon lied about removing brain tumour. Brain surgeon Emmanuel Labram lied to a patient when he said he had successfully removed her brain tumour, a tribunal heard. Emmanuel Labram convinced the woman, known as Patient A, not to seek further treatment by insisting she was fined for 2 years after the procedure at ARI, a hearing was told. But it was said the neurosurgeon knew this was untrue and continued the deception by lying to colleagues and forging documents. Patient A eventually had to seek private treatment, by which stage the lesion was inoperable. The hearing continues. World at 8 states, this hearing should be a disciplinary hearing and Labram should be banned from any further operations for life and have to pay a considerable amount of personal money to this woman's family. If she isn't dead now, she soon will be. It's true what they say about the medical profession. They bury their mistakes. But it would appear that this probable murder is deliberate. Why say you have removed a lesion when you haven't? Of course money is at the bottom of it, as I presume Labram, a black person, has already claimed his fee for performing the so-called operation. Disgusting. Stop giving specialist positions to foreigners when we have our own young doctors out of jobs. Paedophile who groomed 14-year-old Peterborough girl jailed. A paedophile from Peterborough who groomed his 14-year-old victim with burgers and cigarettes has been locked up for more than 3 years. Muhammed Waqas, 23, made hundreds of phone calls and text messages to the young girl in Peterborough before persuading her to have sex in the back of a car in Dogsthorpe. Waqas initially denied sexual activity with the child but pleaded guilty and was sentenced by Judge Nic Madge at the Peterborough Crown Court. Rajinder Gill, defending, said the defendant was immature for his age and his father was seriously ill in his native Pakistan. On Wednesday, Waqas was jailed for 3 years and 9 months and told he would be deported after completing the sentence. World at 8, well, at least he'll see his dad in a few years if the border agency does not lose when he gets out. Also, not so immature, he can't drive his own car. Sentencing, Judge Madge said, everyone knows that the age of consent in this country is 16. There is considerable public concern about older men who groom vulnerable girls in their early teens and have sex with them, rightly so. That is why men who have sex with 13, 14 and 15-year-old girls must expect to go to prison. In this court we treat such offences very seriously. World at 8 says, well, some judges do, but it seems many do not. Appeal after Middle Eastern man rapes woman in Blackpool. Police in Blackpool are appealing for witnesses to come forward after a 43-year-old woman was raped after accepting a lift home. The offence took place sometime between 5 p.m and 11 p.m. on Saturday, 3rd of August, when the victim had been walking down Palatine Road near to Central Drive on the outskirts of the town centre when a man had approached her in a car. The man had called the woman over and offered her a lift. The woman was walking on crutches at the time and, believing she knew the man, accepted his offer of a lift. The man, who had then driven the victim to Woodside Drive, a quiet road leading to Blackpool Zoo, before stopping the car and entering a nearby wooded area and raping her. The man then drove away and left the woman at the scene, where she managed to flag down a passing cyclist for help. Detective Inspector Tony Baxter said, an investigation is underway into the circumstances of exactly what has happened and would reassure people that offences of this nature are rare in Blackpool. The victim in this case was using crutches at the time of the incident, which makes her very distinctive. I'd appeal to anybody that may have seen her getting into a small blue car around the Palatine Road or Central Drive area on Saturday night to contact police on 101. The offender is described as being Middle Eastern in appearance, medium build, between 5'5" to 6 foot tall, with short spiky black hair, smoky eyes and predominant eyelashes. He was wearing a white ribbed jumper with dark blue jeans and was driving an old, small, dark blue car. People with information can also contact the independent charity Crime Stoppers anonymously on 0800 555 111 or online at crimestoppers-uk.org. No personal details are taken and information is not traced or recorded, and you will not go to court. World-A-Date says, I love the police and they're saying that crimes of this nature are extremely rare in Blackpool. They're only rare because the Asian bastards usually choose underage females, not middle-aged ones with crutches. It sounds like a bad joke. European news. Norwegian pagan set to sue France. Norwegian pagan Christian Varg Vikernes, who most media reports describe as a neo-Nazi, is planning to sue France for forcibly arresting him in July on suspicion of planning a major terrorist attack. He was released without charge after police found no evidence to back up their suspicions. We want to sue the authorities for arresting us with no good reason whatsoever, doing so in the most brutal way possible and with children present, he wrote on his blog Thulian Perspectives. In the post, the 40-year-old called on his followers to contribute money to fund the action. We cannot afford to sue them and we see no other solution to this other than to ask for help from you, he wrote, before providing prospective supporters with an email address with which to contact him for bank details. Vikernes, a heavy metal musician, was arrested together with his French wife Marie on July the 16th on suspicion of planning a major terrorist act modelled on that of the far-right extremist Anders Breivik, after French police had had him under surveillance, found out that his wife had bought several hunting rifles for which she had the appropriate permits. The Interior Ministry said at the time of the arrest that Vikernes was close to the neo-Nazi movement and could have been preparing a major terrorist act. However, Interior Minister Manuel Valls later conceded no specific target or project had been identified, but authorities had decided to act before and not afterwards. He was released 2 days after his arrest, when the authorities could find no evidence to justify bringing charges against him. World-A-Date states, let's face it, had he been a Muslim there'd have been demonstrations out of the wazoo and he would have had the funds from Saudi to sue the whole of France. Sweden. Säpo targets leftist militants. Säpo, the intelligence unit of the Swedish police force, is making a concerted effort to come to grips with leftist extremists in the region west of Stockholm, who have conducted some 30 attacks against their political opponents since February, reports Swedish Radio News. We don't feel that any of these figures represent a genuine threat to democracy in terms of starting a revolution or trying to change our form of government, but they are a serious threat to individual democratic functions, says Anza Hagström, senior analyst with Säpo. Among the actions carried out by the militants are telephone threats, attacks with chemicals and beatings of their opponents. In the most recent incident, an apartment in the city of Västerås was vandalised over the weekend. A leftist extremist interviewed by Swedish Radio News said that a number of activists went to a certain apartment in order to attack the person who lives there. When they found out he was not at home, they destroyed the apartment's interior. World-A-Date comments, typical of the left, no dialogue, just destroy, destroy, destroy. It shows who are the true fascists. World News. Gorbachev denies false reports of his death after hacker attack. Mikhail Gorbachev has been forced to announce to the world he was alive and well after hackers broke into microblogs run by a news agency late on Wednesday and posted false reports of his death. I'm alive and well. I understand that some people are trying to use their sites to catch people's attention or are fulfilling the orders of some authority or another, said the former Soviet president, 82. In a statement to newspaper Novaya Gazeta's website. He said the hackers had been hoping in vain and used a Russian profanity to describe them. Gorbachev is disliked by many Russians for what they see as his role in the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was followed by political and economic chaos in the 1990s. World-A-Date. I for one am glad to see this report. At least now I know Gorby remains alive. Israel gives preliminary approval for 800 settler homes. Israel has given preliminary approval for the construction of more than 800 new homes in Jewish settlements on occupied West Bank land where Palestinians seek statehood, an Israeli official said on Thursday. The move could complicate US-sponsored Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations, which resumed last month after an almost 3-year freeze over the settlement dispute and whose second round is expected to take place next week. Guy Inbar, spokesman for Israel's military-run civil administration in the West Bank, said initial plans to build 800 new settler homes were approved on Wednesday, though the actual construction would require green light from the government. Thought for the day: British propaganda? The one thing that has always got me foxed in recent years is the way in which television programmes have adopted the misinformation and school of common purpose mantras and have been allowed to misinform millions of people in this country, influencing the way they think, vote and bring up or not their children. We Brits have always been so strongly against the world of Big Brother, and yet we all feed into it, listen to it and absorb it. Make no mistake, in this day and age, television is still a mass media instrument of political persuasion, whether acknowledged or not. It is the message that is seen and heard by more people than the web, and in many cases it is a more acceptable method adopted by the establishment. Everybody has a television, but not yet everyone has a PC, and the notebook, BlackBerry, iPod, whatever, are still quite pricey for many. Why do you think that we, the British National Party, are no longer on the TV? There are no interviews, no mention of us in elections, not even a slagging off if we demonstrate. There is a reason to it. Since the Euro elections, in which we did well, and even the 2010 general election, in which, although not publicised, we did okay, has anything of any stature been produced over this mass marketing media concerning the British National Party? It is because the establishment and both the Labour and coalition bods don't want the public to know we still exist, which is why they push the EDL into the far right slot and UKIP into the semi-right, non-racist and very well funded governmental box. All the views of both these splinter groups are what we've been saying for years, even to the lovely Mr Bongo Bongo Bloom. And who's been saying we should stop foreign aid? There was a 3-page spread on Bongo Bongo in the Daily Mail yesterday without any reference to us at all. Stephen Glover also had a page in which he merely hinted that the left was virtuous and the right is beastly, which is wrong, but still no British National Party. We have never ever been acknowledged for these sentiments which BNP members have expressed in a far less racist way than Bongo Bongo, and whilst UKIP is suffering for saying it, it's been jumped on as something new that only UKIP MEPs can say and be seen to be saying. If we had even any publicity worthwhile over the last 4 years, this and many other sensible suggestions would have been heard, whereas now the Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems and of course Le Ferret have all jumped on our bandwagon with alacrity, taken our manifesto and adopted it, much to the joy of the man in the street, who now thinks that the 3 main parties will stand by our ideas because it's obviously more acceptable to the viewers and media that our views come from someone else they feel is more acceptable to vote for. How crazy is that? So in a sense the media are jumping for joy, talk about hypocrisy, alive and well in the UK and probably on benefits. The British propaganda of the title is a programme on TV titled The British. I've covered the basic facts in earlier instalments, with their awful presenters and dwelling on slavery as being the brainchild of the Brits solely. The one that did come the nearest to being fairly unpolitical was the one which centred around the Victorian era. Not many awful comics or artists here, thank God. They did hark on the fact that all that industrialisation brought poverty and disease with an overcrowded London, and I thought, yup, and it's here all over again, but this time we've imported our poor and diseased as if we don't have enough of our own. From the beginnings of Spend a Penny at the Crystal Palace to the spreading of cholera by a weary mother who tipped her ill baby's nappy water into the drinking well, to the electrification of the country in 1881, where Godalming in Surrey became the first electric town, and Newcastle had the first electric street in 1879. From then on it was taken that the entire British country had electricity, and they didn't. The programme waxed lyrical over the houses, streets and towns illuminated by electricity and taken from the unsafe and gloomy status of the old gas lamps. But it was decades before the ordinary man in the street had electricity in his house. And when my mother was growing up in Blackheath in the early part of the last century, they still had gas lighting and candles. And they weren't poor, but they just weren't wealthy either. and only the very wealthy could afford electricity, just as only the very wealthy had lavatories inside their homes and not joined to their homes as an outhouse or even down the bottom of the garden. And this is where programmes such as the British, whilst giving a lot of facts, distort many of them to fit in with a social view that is wrong. Britain did become great in Victorian times only because of its inventors and the need to improve a way of life which had gone on for hundreds of years. Children watching this would think that the Victorian age was compiled by the majority of ordinary people living in modern comfort with all mod cons, whilst the poor still slaved in workhouses and in the slums, and furthermore it was the fault of the middle class, of course. They highlighted the plight of the slum dwellers, which was truly awful, but seemed to think electricity and bogs took that away, and it didn't. Like all progress, it had to be paid for, and once again the ordinary man couldn't pay for it. The next episode will be good. They're harping on about the empire and the 2 world wars and how a new nation was forged, so prepare yourself for an enlightening view of early immigration, Hitler, the US, the losing of our empire, the forging of new bonds, probably the common market, and the wonderful enrichment of our country that has been in place since the end of the last war. And for children everywhere and teenagers, it will be a lie, or rather a very much modified précis of the truth. Why? Because Sky would never be allowed to air the real truth, especially with a modern take on it. Too many people remember the truth, so the new generations will have to see the whitewash version, as indeed they do with the not so subtle banning of the British National Party from the media. My question is, will people query some of the rhetoric of the British as they should query the origins of many of the statements coming out of UKIP and the other parties? Will they wonder if these guys had the brains or guts to think of them in the first place? You and I know the answer to both these questions. No, they won't, and that is why Britain is in the state it's in. We take too much for granted and yet we still don't question anything. Start asking yourselves why it is that you are pushed to see exactly what the establishment wants you to see and yet discouraged or banned from seeking alternatives. Answer: knowledge is power, and the less knowledge the sheeples have, the more power the establishment have and their funded lackeys. Simple in its simplicity, really, and very, very clever. And finally, no noise please, I'm having a baby. Because Zimbabwe is reputedly amongst the world's most corrupt countries, bribery is normal and makes the news only when innovators go above and beyond. The anti-poverty organisation Transparency International reported in July that one hospital in Harare had recently been imposing a $5 charge on mothers each time they screamed during childbirth, in addition to the $50 delivery fee. Furthermore, it's long been rumoured that the hospitals in Zimbabwe and other countries may detain mothers and their children at the hospital if they can't pay the fees. Transparency International reported several days later, after finally obtaining a meeting with the government official, that the per scream charge will be lifted. That was reported by the Washington Post. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend.